ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। ॐ नमो भगवते वासुदेवाय। नारायणं नमस्कृत्य नरं चैव नरोत्तमं देवीं सरस्वतीं व्यासं ततो जायमुदीरयेत्। नष्टप्रायेषु अभद्रेषु नित्यं भागवत सेवया भगवतीरुत्तमश्लोके भक्तिर्भवति नैष्टिकी। ॐ अज्ञानतिमिरन्धस्य ज्ञानाञ्जनशलाकया चक्षुरुन्मिलितं येन तस्मै श्रीगुरवे नमः। श्रीचैतन्यमनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूपकदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकम्। नमो विष्णुपादाय कृष्णप्रेष्ठाय भूतले श्रीमते भक्तिवेदान्त स्वामीनिति नामिने। नमस्ते सरस्वते देवे गौरवाणी प्रचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पाश्चात्यदेशतारिणे। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभो नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौरभक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे हरे, हरे राम 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 हरे हरे। Hare Krishna, reading from Srimad Bhagavatam. By His divine grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada ki jai. We are reading from Canto 4, Chapter 29, Talks between Narada and King Prachina Barishat. So, we are at text 2. So, in this chapter, King Prachina Barishat is requesting Narada Muni to explain the allegory more in detail, who is who standing for, and Narada Muni is now going to in detail answer what represents what and what this story is all about. Text 2. नारद उवाच पुरञ्जनं पुरुषं पुरञ्जनं विद्यात् यद्व्यक्तिम् आत्मनः पुरम् एकद्वित्रिचतुष्पादं बहुपादम् अपादकम्. Translation.
The great sage Narad Muni continued, "You must understand that Puranjana, the living entity, transmigrates according to his own work into different types of bodies, which may be one-legged, two-legged, three-legged, four-legged, many-legged, or simply legless. Transmigrating into these various types of bodies, the living entity, as the so-called enjoyer, is known as Puranjana." Purport: how the spirit soul transmigrates from one type of body to another is nicely described here. The word ekapada, one-legged, refers to ghosts, for it is said that ghosts walk on one leg. The word dvipada, meaning biped, refers to human beings. When he is old and invalid, the human being is supposed to be triped or three-legged because he walks with the help of a stick or some kind of cane. Of course, the word Chatuspada refers to quadrupeds or animals. The word Bahupada refers to those creatures who have more than four legs. There are many insects, such as the centipede, and also many aquatic animals that have many legs. The word Apadaka, meaning without legs, refers to serpents. The name Puranjana indicates one who enjoys possessing different types of bodies. His mentality for enjoyment in the material world is accommodated by different types of bodies. Hare Krishna.
So, Puranjan, Narad Muni says here, passes through different types of bodies, and the Puranjan is living entity and passes through one, two, three, four, or many-legged or legless bodies. And this living entity is Puranjan. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that one-legged, they are like the Ekapad, and Ekapad generally refers to the ghosts who walk on the one. So, do ghosts exist? Absolutely yes. What is a ghost? Simplest understanding of ghost is the ghost is one who doesn't have gross body but exists only in the subtle body. And it can happen because of certain things, like somebody commits suicide. That is the worst crime that one can perform. Then committing suicide means the gross body is taken away, but the next gross body is not awarded. because the next gross body is awarded only when the duration within this gross body is complete by the calculation of one's breaths. And then, till then, the person who has committed this crime will remain as a ghost. Okay. And then there are some other conditions like that. We'll not go into depth. Then there are Dvipada and Tripada. Prabhupada writes about triped, three-legged. That's like one taking the cane or some kind of assistant to walk, typically after 70, 75. And then there are not only 4, 5, there are centipedes having 100 legs and 1,000 legs, so on and so forth. Octopus is having 8 legs. And Apadaka. Apadaka are the snakes who do not have legs. So this is how. So the mentality of the enjoyment in the material world is accommodated by different types of the bodies. This is very important. So as the living entity wants to enjoy the desire and the way he deserves, he is awarded a different type of body. Text 3. Yo avidnyata ritastasya purushasya sakheshwarah yanya vidnyayate pumbihi namabhiva kriya gunaihi.
Translation: the person I have described as unknown is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master and eternal friend of the living entity. Since the living entities cannot realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by material names, activities, or qualities, he remains everlastingly unknown to the conditional soul. Purport: because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is unknown to the conditional soul, he is sometimes described in Vedic literature as Nirakara Avinyananta or Avanamanasa Gochara. Actually, it is a fact that the Supreme Personality of Godhead cannot be perceived by material senses as far as his form, name, quality, pastimes, or paraphernalia are concerned. However, when one is spiritually advanced, one can understand the name, form, qualities, pastimes, and paraphernalia of the Supreme Lord. This is confirmed in Bhagavad Gita 18.55. Bhaktyamam abhinyananti yavana yas chasmi tatpataha. One can understand in truth the Supreme Personality of Godhead only when one is engaged in devotional service. Ordinary persons engaged in pious and impious activities cannot understand the form, name, and activities of the Lord. The devotee, however, can know the personality of Godhead in many respects. He can understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that his address is Goloka Vrindavan, and that his activities are all spiritual. Because the Lord's form and activities cannot be understood by materialistic people, he is described by the Shastras as Nirankara, that is, one whose form cannot be ascertained by a materialistic person. This does not mean that the Supreme Personality of Godhead has no form. It means that it is not understood by the karmis or fruitive actors. His form is described in Brahma Samhita as Sachidananda Vigraha. As confirmed by the Padma Purana, Ataha Shri Krishna Namadi, Na Bhave Graham Indriyahi Sevanamukhe hi Jivadau Swayam eva sprute adaha. No one can understand Krishna as he is by utilizing the blunt material senses. However, the Lord reveals himself to his devotees, being pleased with them because of their transcendental loving service rendered unto him. Since the name, form, qualities, and activities of the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna cannot be understood by the material senses, he is also called Adokshasa, meaning beyond sense perception. When the senses are purified by devotional activity, the devotee understands everything about the Lord by the Lord's grace. In this verse, the words Kumbhira Namabhira va Kriya Gunai are especially significant because God Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, has many names, activities, and qualities, although none of them are material. Despite the fact that all these names, activities, and pastimes are mentioned in the Shastras and understood by the devotees, the karmis, that is, fruitive laborers, cannot understand them, nor can the jnanis, mental speculators, understand them. Although there are thousands of names of Lord Vishnu, the karmis and jnanis intermingle the names of the Supreme Godhead with the names of demigods and human beings. Because they cannot understand the actual name of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, they take it for granted that any name can be accepted. They believe that since the absolute truth is impersonal, they can call him by any name. Otherwise, they maintain he has no name. This is not a fact. Here it is clearly stated, Namabhira cha griha gunahi. The Lord has specific names such as Ram, Krishna, Govinda, Narayana, Vishnu, and Adokshitsa. They are indeed many names, but the conditioned soul cannot understand them. Hare Krishna.
Narad Muni further explains the person who is Avidnyat Sakha. That Avidnyat Sakha is none other than the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Living entities cannot realize the Supreme by the material names and activities or the qualities, and thus he remains unknown to the conditioned soul unless enlightened by spiritual master. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the Supreme Lord is spiritual and we are in the material world covered by the material senses. And the material senses cannot understand the spiritual Lord. Ataha Sri Krishna Namadi, including Sri Krishna Nam, Adi, Nam, Roop, Leela, Guna, all this related to the Supreme Lord, na bhavet grahyam indriyaihi. Na bhavet, they cannot be understood by grahya indriya, by the material senses. And that's why the Supreme Lord comes in a form which can be appreciated by material senses. Now, eyes cannot see spiritual, and therefore the Lord comes as the deity form, which is made up of the stone, paint, wood, so on and so forth. Eyes can see only stone, paint, and wood, and therefore the Lord descends in that form, and so that the material eyes can see the form, which apparently is made up from the material elements, but the form is spiritual, and therefore Pratima Nahitumi Sakshat Brajendrananda. Right. So this cannot be understood by the Lord, cannot be understood by the non-devotees. Only the devotee, bhaktya mam abhijanati yavan yaschasmi tatvatah. Only a devotee can understand by the advanced devotional service. And then Srila Prabhupada explains that one can know the Supreme Lord in many different ways. By becoming a devotee, one will understand many things about the Supreme Lord. What is the name of the Lord? The pastimes of the Lord, Janma Karma Chame Divyam. Yo evam yo vetti tatvatah. We know the address of the Lord, we know mother's name, father's name, fiance's name, the wife's name, we know the extramarital affair of the Lord, right? So, and we also know the friends' names, his city's name, his palaces, how these palaces are made about, the pets he has, you know. So the intimate pastimes of the Lord, intimate pastimes in Dwaraka, intimate pastimes in Vrindavan. So the phenomenal information about the Supreme Lord, right? So the Prabhupada writes, we know the Lord in many different ways. Not just that you say, no, God. आगे पीछे बोलो God के नहीं, only God. Does your God has form? Don't know. No, not like that. Scriptures will give a very detailed understanding of God. Not just calling God and period, full stop. No, sir. There is a full understanding of the God. And not only that, we know the language of the God, Bhagavad Gita, and what God wants to say. Manmana bhava mad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskaro. But for those who are too materially absorbed, the Lord is said to be Nirakar, Avidnyat, right? Nirguna, Nirvishesha. And this is how people completely misunderstand the Supreme Lord and misunderstand Satchidananda Vigraha, that Lord is. One name of the Lord is Adhokshaja, another name is Aprameya. Because the Lord cannot be understood by the material sound between A to Dnya, Adhokshaja. So between A to Z, the Lord cannot be understood. He is beyond the material senses, and therefore he is Adhokshaja. He is beyond mathematics, therefore he is Aprameya. Only by the mercy of the Lord he will reveal to his devotee. Correct? Otherwise, it is difficult. And same is the true with the name of the Supreme Lord. The Lord has many, many names. Nam Akari Bahuda Nijasarva Shaktis. All these names are spiritually potent names. Bhaktivinoda Thakur, in detailed literature, he describes about primary, secondary, and tertiary names of the Supreme Lord. The names of the Lord which are related to the intimate pastimes with the devotees, they are called as primary names, right? Like Partha Sarathi, Nandanandana, Janakipati, okay, Sitapati. These are very intimately connected with the devotee and the pastime. They are called as primary names. Other names are called as secondary names. But even these names, people will not have faith and they will equate the name of the Lord with the name of some demigod or some human being and thus commit the Vaishnava Aparadha, Nam Aparadha. Right. And therefore, one of the important thing is not to consider the names of Lord Shiva or Lord Brahma to be equal to the names of Lord Vishnu or independent of the name of Lord Vishnu. Right? So Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva, they are the Mahajans, greatest of the devotees, but they should never be equated to the Supreme Lord, Vishnu Sarveshwareshe, Tada Itara Samadhira, Yasyava Narakisaha. Right. So, this is to be understood by devotee, Bhaktyamam Abhijanati, and not by those who are not devoted to the Supreme Lord. Text 4. यदा जिगृक्षण पुरुष कार्स्नेन प्रकृतेर्गुणान् नवद्वारं द्विहस्तङ्घ्री तत्रानुमत्साध्विति. Translation.
When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prepares out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands, and 2 legs. Thus, he prefers to become a human being or a demigod. Purport. This is a very nice explanation of how the spiritual being, the part and parcel of Krishna, God, accepts a material body by virtue of his own desires. Accepting 2 hands, 2 legs, and so on, the living entity fully enjoys the modes of material nature. Lord Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita 7.27, Ichcha dvesha samuttena dvandva mohena bharata sarva bhutani sammoham sarga yanti parantapa. O son of Bharata, Arjuna, O conqueror of the foe, all living entities are born into a delusion, overcome by the dualities of desire and hate. Originally, the living entity is a spiritual being, but when he actually desires to enjoy this material world, he comes down. From this verse, we can understand that the living entity first accepts a body that is human in form, but gradually, due to his degraded activities, he falls into lower forms of life, into the animal, plant, and aquatic forms. By the gradual process of evolution, the living entity again attains the body of a human being and is given another chance to get out of the process of transmigration. If he again misses his chance in the human form to understand his position, he is again placed in the cycle of birth and death in various types of bodies. The desire of the living entity to come into the material world is not very difficult to understand. Although one may be born in a family of Aryans where there are restrictions against meat eating, intoxication, gambling, and illicit sales, still one may want to enjoy these forbidden things. There is always someone who wants to go to a prostitute for illicit sex, to a hotel to eat meat and drink wine, or to a gambling club to enjoy so-called sports. All these propensities are already within the hearts of the living entities. Loke vevayamisha madhya seva nitya hi jantar. But some living entities stop to enjoy these abominable activities and consequently fall down to a degraded platform. The more one desires a degraded life within his heart, the more he falls down to occupy different forms of abominable existence. This is the process of transmigration and evolution. A particular type of animal may have a strong tendency to enjoy one kind of sense enjoyment, but in the human form, one can enjoy all the senses. The human form has the facility to utilize all the senses for gratification. Unless one is properly trained, he becomes a victim of the modes of material nature as confirmed by Bhagavad Gita 3.27. प्रकृतिः क्रियमाणानि गुणः कर्माणि सर्वशः अहंकार विमूढ़ात्मा कर्ताहम् इति मन्यते. The bewildered spirit soul, under the influence of the three modes of material nature, thinks himself the doer of activities that are in actuality carried out by nature. As soon as one desires to enjoy his senses, he puts himself under the control of material energy and automatically or mechanically is placed into the cycle of birth and death in various life forms.
Now, further, Narad Muni is explaining, as soon as the living entity wants to enjoy the material nature in their totality, right? So, this totality is very important. Then he specially accepts this form of Navadvare Puredehi, form which is made up of the 9 gates. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains, this is a very nice explanation of how living spiritual being attains the material body by the virtue of his own desires. Right? Bhagavad Gita explains this. Ichha dvesha samuthena. Out of desire and hatred, dvandva mohena bharata. The living entity wants to separately enjoy and thus goes for a material body. Now, what is the difference here? Difference here is that the living entity will receive a particular body according to the desire to enjoy the senses. But when he wants to in totality enjoy the senses, he will be given the human form of life. So Prabhupada says originally this living spark, he comes to enjoy the material world, he comes down and slowly, he is just undergoing the evolution. Now this evolution is not Darwin's evolution, this is spiritual evolution. Okay. So Darwin's evolution never accepted soul. It just said that one body is changing to another. We have sufficiently discussed this. That it is like the benches changing from first, second, third standard. It's not the benches, but the boys and girls sitting on the benches. They are moving from first, second, third standard, right? So this is the spiritual evolution we are discussing. Spiritual evolution of the soul from lower bodily forms to higher bodily forms. And this is how finally one becomes a human. He attains this chance. And if this chance is missed, again he will be placed in this cycle of birth and death, which is samsara. Srila Prabhupada writes here that the desire to enjoy materially is not very difficult to understand. Somebody may come from a very cultured family, still, one will go to, places where, and he will eat meat or indulge in intoxication, gambling, so on and so forth, brothels. And this is, although he is coming from a very good family, very good background, all the good samskara, but still, when we have this kind of a desire and inclination, the more one desires a degraded life within his heart, the more he falls down to occupy the different bodily forms in the abominable conditions. Later, when we read, we are not going to read that also, but when we read the 5th canto, 29th chapter, 5.29, we know 5.29 Bhagavad Gita is Bhoktaram Yajnatapasam, but 5.29 Bhagavatam is 5th canto, 29th chapter, where different punishments are described in the different hellish planets. And for this, this wrongdoing, what is the punishment in the hellish planet? That is very elaborately described. Okay. So unless one is very properly trained, one becomes a victim of the material nature. And the victimization in totality, Prabhupada says, a particular form of the animal may have a strong tendency to enjoy one kind of sense gratification. Like ahara, the elephant may take quintals, hundreds of kgs of food and simply enjoy ahara. But elephant is not so much interested in nidra, bhaya, maithunam, ityadi. Bhaya, if, nidra, if you take a polar bear or somebody, they may sleep for 6 months. So they, or the pigeon, if you take, pigeon is for the maithunam. It can have the activity once per every hour. And that's why, the pigeon, that's how the pigeon is. But in the human form of life, right, that's what the verse is. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in totality, then what happens is he comes to this form, and that is Navadware Pure Dehi, the city of 9 gates. So the city of 9 gates can be utilized in the service of the Lord, or city of 9 gates can be utilized in total sense gratification. And this distinction, this choice is the difference between, one either continues the path of samsara or one transcends the modes of material nature and comes to devotional service. Text 5. Buddhim tu pramadam vidyat mamaham iti yatkritam mabhisthaya dehesmin puman bhungte akshabhi gunan. Translation.
The great sage Narada continued. The word pramada mentioned in this regard refers to material intelligence or ignorance. It is ignorance. It is to be understood as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with a material body. Influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he began to enjoy and suffer through his senses. Thus, the living entity is entrapped. Purport. In the material existence, so called intelligence is actually ignorance. When intelligence is cleared up, it is called Buddhi Yoga. In other words, when intelligence is dovetailed in with the desires of Krishna, it is called Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. Therefore, in Bhagavad Gita 10.10, Krishna says, Tesham satatayuktanam bhajatam priti purvakam dadami buddhi yogam tam yenamam upayantite. To those who are constantly devoted and worship me and with love, I give the understanding by which they can come to me. Real intelligence means linking with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. When this is done, the Supreme Personality of Godhead from within gives one real intelligence by which one can return home back to Godhead. Intelligence in material world is described in this verse as pramada, because in material existence, the living entity falsely claims to be his. He thinks, I am the monarch of all I survey. This is ignorance. Actually, nothing belongs to him. Even the body and the senses do not belong to him. For they are given to him by the grace of the Lord to satisfy his different propensities through material energy. Nothing actually belongs to the living entity, but he becomes mad after everything, claiming this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Janasya moho yamaham mameti. This is called illusion. Nothing belongs to the living entity, but he claims that everything belongs to him. Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommends that this false intelligence to be purified. Cheto Darpana Marjanam. When the mirror of intelligence is polished, the real activities of the living entity begin. This means that when a person comes to the platform of Krishna consciousness, his real intelligence acts. At that time, he knows that everything belongs to Krishna, nothing belongs to him. As long as one thinks that everything belongs to him, he is in material consciousness. And when he knows perfectly that everything belongs to Krishna, he is in Krishna consciousness. Thank you.
So now Narad Muni continued. The word pramada refers to material intelligence. Okay. Pramada, so which is the young woman Puranjani, or any reference here made to be a woman, that is referring to. So Purusha is the Jiva, living entity, and woman here in this case is the material intelligence. What happens by material intelligence? Material intelligence makes sure that one identifies with the material body. And as soon as that identification with the material body takes place, there is aham mameti, ahankar and mamata, and he begins to enjoy and suffer through the senses, and thus the living entity is completely trapped. Bhagavad Gita 2.62-63 describes this. Dhyayato vishayan pumsah sangasteshu upajayate sangat sanjayate kamah kamat krodho vijayate क्रोधात् भवति सम्मोहः सम्मोहात् स्मृति विभ्रमः स्मृति भ्रंशात् बुद्धिनाशो बुद्धिनाशात् प्रणश्यति. So the complete trapping of a living entity is explained in these two verses there. In the purport, Srila Prabhupada explains that the material existence, the intelligence is actually ignorance. And more the intelligence, the material intelligence is cleaned up, then that is called as Buddhi Yoga or Bhakti Yoga. And that's how the Lord confirms, Dadami Buddhi Yogam Tam. So what this means is that, the material life is more like a daldal, the quicksand. More one tries to get out, more one will be actually in the tight grip of that quicksand. More one will be dubofa in the quicksand. So that needs a higher intelligence, and especially from the spiritual master and the mercy of the Lord, Guru Krishna Prasadepai. So the real intelligence means one has to link ourselves with Krishna. And by that linking process itself is called as Yoga Karmasu Kaushalam. Very Kaushalam, very expertly we have to connect with the Supreme Lord through Bhakti Yoga. Otherwise, one will be victim of the material intelligence, which is pramada. Pramada means which produces mada. Very intensified mada. That is called as pramada. Right. So, and Prabhupada says, what is that mada? Mada is aham mameti. Ahankar and mamata. this is mine, this is mine, this is mine. Actually, nothing belongs to him. Even the body and the senses, they do not belong to the living entity. They are all obtained from the Supreme Lord. But he keeps on claiming Janasya mohoyam aham mameti, and this is called as great illusion. And therefore, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu recommended this process of Cheto Darpana Marjanam. When we start chanting Hare Krishna, Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, slowly and surely, Cheto Darpana Marjanam is taking place, and one is living entities cured and purified from within, and thus then he will come to understand the real activities. And the real activities are activities related to the Supreme Lord. And that begins with relating the material activities with the Supreme Lord, just like Arjuna related his fight in the service of the Lord and became a great warrior, became a great devotee. So Prabhupada concludes, this is to understand that everything belongs to Krishna, and that is the real Krishna consciousness. So we will conclude here and continue tomorrow. Tomorrow is Rath Yatra in Pune. Nonetheless, we will be having our regular reading will go on, right? Srila Prabhupada ki jai, Gaura Bhakta Vrinda ki jai. Thank you, Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you,
Thank you, Prabhuji. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Prabhupada.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
Prabhupada.
Prabhupada.
Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhupada. Thank you, Prabhuji. Hare Krishna.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you, Prabhupada.